Well, first of all, once again, I just want to say thank you everybody for joining. Really glad that you all could take some time out of your day to make it here. And welcome to the NSX-V to NSX-T Migration Task Force webinar presented by 27 Virtual. My name is Andrew Grismore. I'm one of the senior consultants and a V expert. I'm joined by Brent Kaplan, our Director of Business Development, William Grismore, one of our NSX-T architects and one of the founders of 27 Virtual, as well as special guest DJ Antonucci from Rest NSX, who we'll hear from in just a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started. We call this the NSX-V to NSX-T Migration Task Force webinar because we here at 27 Virtual saw the need for the move from NSX-V to NSX-T and actually specifically created a team of people that are dedicated to handling these projects. So we're actually engaged with multiple customers right now working on NSX-V to T migrations, and you're going to hear some of that experience from Bill as we go forward. Some initial things to note here is that we do have a survey that's going to pop up at the end of the webinar, and it's going to ask you a few questions. Please, it's really important to us that you go ahead and fill out that survey. And if you do, you have a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. So make sure that as the webinar closes and your browser pops up at the end with the survey, please fill that out. It gives us a feel for what was good, what was bad, and how to do better going forward. And on top of that, you get a chance to win. And considering it's only, about 25 or so people out there, you've got a pretty darn good chance of getting it. So please fill that out. That being said, I want to introduce William Grismore. He's going to tell you guys a little bit about 27 Virtual, get us introduced to NSX-T, and then we'll talk about those migrations. Bill?
Everybody, welcome to the webinar today. Thanks for taking some time out of your busy days. I know how busy everybody is nowadays, but thank you very much for joining. Real quick, 27 Virtual. So we've been doing migrations, starting almost a year ago or longer. As soon as I think T was like 2.4. We're a VMware partner. We've been a VMware partner since 2008. We've been doing NSX since its inception back in 2013, 2014. We have a team of people here at 27 Virtual that focus on NSX. Our core business is around NSX design, NSX deployments. We did a whole bunch of NSX-V deployments. So we have several customers that have NSX-V. They're looking to move to NSX-T. And we have a lot of customers out there that, have V that we never did the deployment for, but due to some of the complexities, based on our experience, they're reaching out to us to try to help them with those migrations. So, we're going through this process and we're learning, things along the way as well. But, definitely NSX is something that's in our wheelhouse. We've done all different types of NSX deployments. We've done NSX deployments on top of VxRail. We've done NSX deployment on top of vSAN ready node type deployments, regular 3-tier architecture, HP Synergy. We've done very large scale deployments, hundreds of hosts, to smaller footprints and everything in between. We've done configurations where we're doing just microsegmentation, or we're doing maybe just network virtualization, or both. And then the really complex ones is where they're doing network virtualization and they're doing security, and they're also doing the services like load balancers and NATing and those type of things. So we've seen a lot of different types of NSX-V deployments that now need to migrate to T. And we have several of those under our belt at this point, so we can provide some insight. So as Andrew continues to the presentation, I'll be adding in some color there on where that kind of comes in. So during today's session, we are going to receive you're going to receive a link to the recording. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop questions into the Q&A chat window, and we'll be monitoring those as we go along. And then, as Andrew mentioned, we have the survey at the end. Hey, Andrew, can I win that survey? Are employees exempt? That $100 gift card sounds pretty good to me.
I wish, but I think it's up to them.
I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, so let's get an introduction to NSX-T. Let's talk a little bit about what its capabilities are, why you'd be interested in moving to NSX-T, other than the fact that, you know, you kind of have to soon. But just so you guys can get a feel for where we're playing in the NSX-T realm, you know, it's all part of the greater networking and security virtualization capabilities that VMware has out there right now. And just so you can get a feel for where NSX-T is in that realm, what we're looking at is our NSX data center. So if you're worried about, you know, what license it takes to do NSX-T, it's all covered within that NSX data center licensing. But it expands out just beyond what's going in your data center as we talk about NSX Cloud. You have the capabilities with NSX Intelligence, as well as, and there's been a lot of additions to this recently with the distributed IDS IPS capabilities that you can add on with NSX-T that you can only do as you go forward in the NSX-T capabilities. So we'll use all this in combination with tools like Network Insight and automation tools. And in my opinion, some of the most interesting deployments that we've done are not just stopping at network virtualization, but combining it with those extra tools and building out those automated workflows with it in combination. So all of this plays into that virtual cloud networking space that VMware has. And we're going to focus in on the NSX data center piece here as we go forward. All right. And just as a comparison, this is really the only place that NSX-V exists as it stands right now. So Bill, you want to give an idea of what's going on with what we're dealing with in terms of getting these migrations started?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot going on, right? So, you know, one thing that we see is customers using the NSX environment to be able to, you know, create this network virtualization platform and all the benefits that it brings. What we see in T, and the reason we want to move to T, is now we can support this type of technology, this network virtualization, for not only the VM workloads you see on the left, but also for containers. So NSX-T is very important. In the latest release of the Tanzu, you can actually bring your own networking now and use vSphere networking. But there's still a huge benefit to leveraging the NSX-T T1 as a way to get those pods connected up and out and leverage all the features you need from like an IP address management and pulling aspect from containers, and also the security that we can do on the containers down to the container network interface. So that's something new with T for sure. The ability to leverage the networking all the way out into a different hypervisor is important. And the ability to extend the network to the cloud. And you saw on the previous screen, Andrew was talking about the, you know, how the product has expanded. So the fact that we can go to the cloud is important. And the extension of the network and the security to the cloud is kind of like this nirvana, where you can have a VM on-prem, have a VM in the cloud, leverage NSX-T, move the VM back and forth, maybe using HCX or a layer 2 extension, move the VM back and forth between data centers to cloud, keep the same IP address, be on the same layer 2 segment, which is important, but then also incorporate the same consistent security. And that could be with NSX Cloud with an agent installed in a native cloud environment, or it could be the VMware solution, which is AWS, which is VMC on AWS, or now the Azure AVS solution, or the new Google Cloud Engine VMware solution. It's a VMware stack, but in the cloud. And NSX-T is important there, very important in that case, because we can leverage this new feature called federation and tie all that together. And we can also have bare metal workloads protected with agents. So if you want to extend security out to a bare metal server, you know, Red Hat platforms, Windows Server 2016, 2019, we can actually now put an agent on a bare metal server. And with NSX-T, we can actually now see that bare metal server as an endpoint and apply a firewall rule to it, which is, you know, really important. So these are all the reasons we want to be able to move to T. Not that V is not a great product, V is an outstanding product, but these are some of the really compelling reasons why we want to get, you know, away from just the blue box that Andrew just popped up there and get into all these other features that T brings. So in 3.0 and now 3.1, we'll talk about it a little bit. You know, cloud scale network agility. We kind of talked about cloud scale federation allows us to take these kind of disparate stacks, if you will, imagine in the cloud and on-prem, and federate them and just move VMs back and forth. Not that I sit and move VMs back and forth between on-prem and the cloud all the time, but it's definitely something you can do. Government cloud support, EVPN support, multi-VRF, so like a VRF Lite support for you networking people out there, which is kind of a nice feature in 3.0. The security is huge. This improved IDS, IPS now in 3.1, we have the IPS, IDS as well. The NSX intelligence building firewall rules based on what we see in the vSphere environment, which complements what vRealize Network Insight can do. Layer 7 edge firewalling URL building, and 3.1 we can actually build custom URL filters now, which is really cool. We can whitelist traffic. And I mentioned earlier on the other slide, the DFW for the Windows 16, 2019, and some Red Hat bare metal servers. We put an agent to protect them. The application modernization is very important. The Tanzu portfolio, the TKG, or the PKS/TKGI environments, where we are going to leverage extending these software-defined networks up to the containers or to the pods, namespace isolation, API integration to do all sorts of customization, and the converged network interface adapter that we can leverage on those containers. Something that's really important, the converged VDS. There is a feature in T in the earlier versions where you had to have an NVDS and still have your VDS. And it could be a little bit challenging where you'd actually have to have a couple extra physical adapters in your host, or maybe move adapters around from the VDS over to the NVDS. That's been solved in 3.0. So vSphere 7 and 3.0 combined will give you that capability. So that's important. Some integration with Terraform and Ansible modules to make automation, networking as code, they like to call it. New alarms and traps and OpenStack integration. All these things are features with 3.0, and then some other new features with 3.1 that were just announced. So some really good stuff there. Again, compelling reasons to move to 3.0. And back to you, Andrew.
Awesome. So then the question really becomes, what does it look like so that we can move toward this NSX-T platform? I think that, you can see that with all the additional capabilities and features that this is VMware's second iteration of NSX, and there's a lot to it that makes it more of the ideal of what we were looking for the first time with NSX, and that we can really run those workloads anywhere they need to be and have consistent networking and security. So now we can start talking about some of those V components of what it means to bring them over to NSX-T. Obviously, the goal is to get our workloads over. We want to take those VMs that are running on our logical switches that are taking advantage of the distributed firewall over to an NSX-T environment. And there are a couple ways to make that happen. But we also have to figure out what our edges are going to look like as we go from V to T, and then how all of those services that we may be using, including the distributed firewall, but also any of those edge services as well, like NAT, load balancing, VPN, how those are going to look and how they would convert over to NSX-T as well. So what we need to do is really get a holistic idea of what that NSX-V environment is and what we're trying to accomplish there, and then have an understanding of what that's going to look like in T. So we have a couple of strategies on how we can convert those objects and then how we can move those workloads over. And the first being an in-place migration utilizing the migration coordinator. And what that does is it actually transforms your NSX-V objects into NSX-T. So it actually takes your existing V deployment, as long as the topology is supported and the objects are supported. And this is the VMware solution that you get with the NSX-T manager, and it will transform those objects and those hosts into NSX-T. So that's the first option, is if you meet the criteria, you can just take everything that you have, utilize the migration coordinator, and transform those objects. If you're not going to use that, then we're going to go more to a coexist or a lift and shift migration. And what that entails is essentially deploying NSX-T on other hardware and utilizing possibly some tools to convert some of the objects that we have from V to T or building them out from scratch over there, and then migrating the workloads to those ESXi hosts. And when you're doing a coexist, you can do that with just like a regular vMotion or bring up new workloads on those new hosts. Or you can utilize a tool like HCX. You can do some network extension or you can do some bridging, and then you can migrate the workloads with that. So you have some options here. A lot of it is going to be dependent on what you actually are doing in NSX-V, what the complexities are, and if you meet the requirements for an in-place or a lift and shift migration. It's important to note, though, that there are some restrictions on the migration coordinator. We have seen some improvements in the most recent release just a few days ago with NSX-T 3.1, but there are still limitations like no universal objects and no north-south OSPF for the networking in NSX-V if you're going to do the in-place migration.
Hey, Andrew, can you go back to that slide just for a minute?
Sure.
The one thing I want to talk about here, just real quick for everybody, is, when you're thinking about which one of these methods you're going to use, the primary reason you're going to choose to use the in-place upgrade method is you have an environment, let's say you're maybe a smaller customer or it's a smaller cluster, because there could be different situations with this. But let's say that I'm a smaller customer and I have, say, I don't know, a 4-host cluster, to keep it simple. And I don't have the ability to purchase new seed hosts where I can build a separate cluster. Or if I'm in a vSAN configuration, I just can't rip out hosts and build a new cluster because, I need those 3 hosts to have that ideal vSAN. I know you can do 2 hosts with vSAN, but an ideal vSAN would be with your 3 hosts. So if you have like a small vSAN footprint or you're a small customer, sometimes it's difficult to buy new servers or to pull things out of an existing cluster. So that in that situation, you're kind of forced into that in place. The only other option you'd have to make another type of in place you could do potentially is to back everything up or document your configuration, shut your VMs off, blow away V, do a rip and replace, put down T, and connect everything back up, which obviously would cause a lot of downtime. On the next one, and if you guys have any questions, we want this to be as interactive as possible. There's a chat window there. If you guys have any questions on these, because this is really important, just put a message in the chat. Another quick note on the coexist. There's kind of 2 different versions of this. You can do a coexist lift and shift where you have the same vCenter, and I'm going to build another cluster. And again, I'm going to have some seed host, or if I have a cluster that's big enough where I can like steal from Peter to pay Paul, let's say I've got like a 14 host cluster and I'm going to keep the same vCenter. I'm going to build a brand new cluster. I'm going to steal a couple of hosts out of this cluster and drop them into that new cluster. That new cluster is going to be prepped for T, and I'm going to kind of gradually move hosts over. And then the last one about the HCX and the layer 2 extension is if that is in a brand new greenfield on a different vCenter, like in a brand new VCF stack, if I'm going to move workloads over to that new stack, I need some way to get the VMs from this storage to that storage. So I can leverage HCX, vSphere assisted replication potentially to help migrate and get the VMs replicated over, build a layer 2 extension to kind of move the workloads over and I have to re-IP, especially if I can't move them all over at once. So the layer 2 extension is important if the target that I'm moving my workloads to isn't big enough to bring all those layer 2 VMs together at once, because I don't want to have to re-IP during the middle migration. Back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, it's really good to know. And a lot of these decisions are just based off of the both hardware and software configuration the customers have and any limitations that go along with it. But it does take some careful consideration, and it's a big part of the plan of how we're going to attack this and get from V to T in the most efficient way possible. So let's just talk about some of the prereqs that we have. We want to make sure, of course, that we fully understand and have a stable NSX-V environment. If we're going to utilize the migration coordinator, then it's got to be 644 or later. We have some additional capabilities with the migration coordinator, again, that just came out. So we'll talk about those in just a little bit. You have to be a part of one of the 5 supported topologies if you're going to be doing the networking piece. And then make sure that your vSphere is solid so that we can do the migration and the actual in-place changes on those ESXi hosts. And then in order to do it, you're going to need that NSX-T manager out there and deployed, as well as if you're going to utilize them, any edges that would need to host the tier 1 and tier 0 gateways that would be converted from your NSX-V DLR and edge deployments.
And one other thing on this slide, one point, another optional pre-migration requirement for customers to go to vSphere 7 to take advantage of the converged NVDS concept. And if you're going to do that on that very first box, you would have to be up to NSX-V version 6.4.8. So if you wanted to go to vSphere 7 and use the converged VDS concept, then NSX 6.4.8 and 7 together.
Yep. So let's talk about some of these supported topologies. But before we do, I think it's good to quickly note that, you can utilize the migration tool provided in NSX-T to perform some of these migrations and do it in place. But that's the main benefit, is to do this in place. If you're going to be rebuilding this, then you're probably going to want to be wanting to think about what your new NSX-T architecture is going to look like. So let's actually talk about some of those components that we have here in NSX-T and how some of the V components would actually transform, because a lot of our customers, they're focused on NSX-V. They haven't had time to check out some of those T components and what it would actually look like. So let's go through that quickly. If we were to go with topology 1, so this is one of the 5 supported topologies to do the in-place upgrade, here's what the transformation would look like. This is the topology that we have in NSX-V, where we have a distributed logical router, we have our edge services gateway in HA mode, and we're utilizing BGP for the north-south connectivity. What that would transform into as we go to NSX-T is our edge nodes, so VMs that are our edges, that actually host what we call a tier 0 gateway. And the tier 0 gateway has both a distributed router component, just like the DLR functions as a part of the kernel of the host. And then it also has an SR component that lives inside of these edges. So that's what's responsible for the north-south connectivity. And this is what's going to be active passive, is that edge utilization that we have in here. So just like we're utilizing HA across 2 edges, we have active passive HA across 2 edges in NSX-T as well. It's just that the tier 0 component of the SR will live active in one and passive in the other, as well as distributed across the hosts.
If you guys have questions, just post your question to the chat. In the webinar format we're in, we can't actually open your mic. So just, John, if you got a question, just pop it in the chat there and I'll answer it for you.
Yeah. Also, if we have some time at the end and you guys want to hang out for a little bit, we can spend some time doing some open Q&A, so where we can actually go through and unmute your mics as well and have that discussion if you want to ask some more detailed questions, or, set up a time where we can go into a little bit more detail on this. So John has posted his question in the Q&A. Bill, if you want to read that real quick. And we're happy to take some questions in the middle of the presentation. It's good to get some insight here. So the question is, currently on 6.4.6 of V and vSphere 6.7 update 3, to take advantage of the VDS, the normalized VDS in vSphere 7 and no downtime when migrating VMs to my NSX-T cluster, I would have to upgrade to NSX-V 6.4.8. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, the short answer to take advantage of the VDS 7, yes. The no downtime, that depends whether you're doing an in-place upgrade or doing a lift and shift. So
right.
The thing there is, if you're going to be doing an in-place upgrade, there's going to be some outage, right? But to take it lift and shift, yeah, with the lift and shift, you can make a migration with no downtime. You may need to do a bridge, or you may need to do something to try to make sure the migration goes as smooth as possible, depending on the resources. But yes, that'll definitely make things a lot easier. If you have an opportunity to go to vSphere 7 and 6.4.8 and do a lift and shift, you can do that with no downtime.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, 648. Make sure you go to 648.
Yep. And that's to use the migration coordinator, correct?
Well, it's just to make sure that they can take advantage of the convergent VDS so they don't have as many network card thoughts in part of the migration.
Gotcha. All right, so another supported topology would look like this, where we have, once again, a distributed logical router in V. We have our two edges in NSX-V as well, but this time we're utilizing equal cost multipathing across those edges and out to the physical network. And we can do that in NSX-T, but once again, you'll see that it gets converted to just a tier 0 gateway with the distributed routing component. And this time, our service routers that are spread across our edge nodes are actually going to be in active mode. So this way we can utilize that active equal cost multipathing topology here. But once again, all we would need to support this is the distributed routing functionality of the tier 0, as well as the active service router components inside of the edges. Topology 3 looks a little bit different because what you're going to notice is that we actually have 3 levels of our NSX-V components that we're looking at here. We have a DLR, we have HA edges, and then we have our ECMP edges to get us actually out of the NSX environment to the physical network. So we have this possibly tenant edge that's providing some type of stateful services here. We have our ECMP out to the physical network, and you can convert this to NSX-T as well. And this is where you're going to get your multi-tier NSX-T setup that includes a tier 1 that has a DR and SR components inside of an edge. And then you're also going to have your tier 0 DR and SR components. And again, the SR components will live inside of an edge that provide connectivity out to our physical network. So tier 1 gateway, tier 0 gateway, so that we can have a topology that's similar to what we're doing over in NSX-V. Topology 4 is, again, it's going to look somewhat similar to what we saw before, but the main difference is right here from an NSX-V perspective, where we have a one-arm load balancer out there. And what you'll notice is that we get a tier 1 so that we can perform the SR capabilities for the load balancing inside of an edge right over here. And we have our tier 0 for the north-south ECMP or active connectivity. So the main piece that we added in and threw in here is a load balancer, and we can convert that directly in place with the migration coordinator and get that SR there. And then the final one here is our edges actually being connected directly to some logical switches. So in this case, we could be doing something like providing just load balancing to these southbound networks, whatever they may be. And you can actually convert this as well over to NSX-T, and we're going to get the tier 0, providing those stateful services to our networks that we have connected to the tier 0. We could utilize a service port if they're VLANs and provide those stateful services from our tier 0. Let's say you're just doing that load balancing there. We can provide that and in place directly convert that to NSX-T. So you get some capabilities here with the migration coordinator and these in-place upgrades, but you have to be in these supported topologies in order to convert directly and do that in-place upgrade. Bill, you want to talk a little bit about the newest capabilities of the migration coordinator in 3.1?
Yeah, and the other thing on the limits of the migration coordinator, if your current environment doesn't support one of those topologies or whatever it is, you can still use the migration coordinator. You just have to go back and modify your environment, or I like to say dumb down your environment. So if you know what those 5 supported topologies are and you're forced to do an in-place upgrade, you can convert your environment down to support that. And the other thing I also want to point out, you didn't see anything in that example of those 5 topologies where there was a multi-site deployment, where you have an NSX-V manager as a primary at one site and an NSX-V manager as a secondary at the other site. So that's not supported at all. So, the in-place upgrade works great. It just has some limits around it. A new feature in 3.1 is the ability to now go through and migrate the firewall rules over. But again, it's one of those things where if you're in a multi-site, you're using universal, it doesn't understand what that is. but you can definitely take advantage of this new feature. So it is improved. So this would allow you to stand up an NSX-T environment with your NSX-T manager. And then when you start the migration coordinator service from the command line at the console of your manager, you could then go in and perform a migration. And there's now an option to choose just to bring over the distributed firewall rules. So that's a nice new feature there as well. But it doesn't allow you to convert the objects to something that's in T, something that it doesn't understand. So you would still have to go back into your V environment, potentially normalize it, and then be able to go through that wizard again, and then migrate those firewall rules over. The one thing I want to mention just real quick, whenever you're bringing firewall rules over, if it's a phase migration, just keep in mind that if you still have stuff that's sitting on your V environment and you're migrating workloads over to T with those new firewall rules, there could be some situations where a firewall rule in V would prevent something on the T side from talking. So you may have to go back over and put an IP set in a source rule on the V side to support that. Some other new features, we do support some VRA topologies. If you have some blueprints, it's going to understand that as well. A few select guest introspection services like Trend Micro Deep Security, it would understand those objects and help bring those over. I haven't done one of those yet. And then support for multiple VTEP configurations. And you can see the scale has been increased to support a little bit larger set. Andrew?
Yep, that's awesome. So now we have an understanding of what the migration coordinator can bring us, but there's still a lot of questions to be answered. Going through and looking at your topology, trying to figure out if you need to bring it down to a certain level. Maybe you have unsupported objects, or maybe you do match up with one of those migration coordinator capabilities, but still have questions about, what NSX-T is, what it looks like, what all the objects mean, and you could use some help. And that's really what 27 Virtual is here for, and why we created the NSX-V to NSX-T migration task force, is to help our customers out in figuring out what the best pathway is. Maybe your NSX-V architecture isn't doing what you thought it would, or it's just not satisfactory, and you need a re-architecture when it comes to NSX-T so that you can better accomplish your goals. All of that is why we exist. And you have to go through and get an understanding of what you've got, make sure that you answer all the questions correctly. Do we meet this topology, or do we have to dumb it down? Do we have the correct service insertion to be able to go to T? Are all of our objects compatible that we're using in the distributed firewall to go over to NSX-T, or are we using universal? You have to go through and answer these questions as we go from question to question to question, to make sure that we're using the right tool, or if we're even able to do an in-place upgrade. And so we're here to be able to help you answer these questions, and to be able to say, if you end up in a place where you can't use the V to T migration coordinator and you need to do some type of custom architecture, custom migration, then we can take you through those steps, because we were on the forefront of this. We've done it before. We have the V experience, we have the T experience, and we can help you answer those questions and get to your ultimate destination. So we've used the migration coordinator. We've done in-place upgrades. We've done the lift and shifts where we do a custom migration and rebuild everything out. It all depends, like Bill said, on what your hardware setup is, if you plan on going to something new, or if you have the resources, or if you don't. And on top of that, our guest that we have today with us, DJ from Rest NSX, they've actually built out a tool that we use in combination with them as a really awesome partnership that we've put together, that helps us understand what you have from an NSX-V perspective and actually convert those objects to NSX-T. And they've got all kinds of really cool capabilities that allow us to do all that easier. But to explain it and actually demo that a little bit, I'm going to pass this over to DJ from Rest NSX, and he'll show you guys around his tool that they've built out to make this process go smoother, faster, easier for us and you.
Got it. Thank you very much, Andrew. Great content so far. Everyone, nice to meet you. DJ Antonucci from Rest NSX. We also have on the line as a moderator, Paul Byrne from the Rest NSX side. We're both former VMware guys who left the company to start our own to focus on some very key things as it relates to NSX. One of them being NSX-V to T migrations, and the other one is just general operations and management of NSX. We're going to give you a sneak preview of both. We're going to do a V to T migration, and we're also going to show you some tools that will help you assess the V environment and manage it better before you even think about going to T. So we'll start from a slideware perspective with the MAT tool, so the Migration Assistance tool. This is an OVA that you would install in your environment, and it's looking at this migration from a different lens. It's that lift and shift approach, but looking at it from a life cycle perspective of saying, assessing the V environment, telling you, where all the, warts are, all the bones are buried, so you're not, launching Migration Coordinator and figuring out everything you have to fix. So that's kind of goal number one, is really the assessment. Number two is what Andrew and Bill was talking about, is transforming the unsupported objects into T-compatible ones. That's what we call our phase two. And then phase three is the actual migration itself. And if all else fails, you can roll it back, start over. And to a very, very important point, that this is a lift and shift methodology, which is at the end of the day, you're going to have your NSX-V environment up and running, you'll have your T environment up and running, and the configuration will be mirrored to the T side in all the T constructs. And at that point, you can interconnect them. You can migrate hosts over at your own pace. So it's a really nice option for customers who don't want to do that in-place upgrades with the downtimes. And we'll show you that live here in a minute. The one thing I want to highlight is that also we support something called many-to-one migrations. So we could take up to 12 V managers and consolidate them down to a single T manager. These could be running universal mode, these could be global mode. It doesn't matter to us. An object is an object, a rule is a rule. So we're able to consolidate that for you, which a lot of our customers are doing because of just the sheer scale of T is better than V on that side. So with that said, I'm going to jump over to the demo, and thank you very much. So now you guys should be staring at a screen called on the REST-NSX login page. And I'm going to log into our first application, which is REST-NSX, the name of our company. And the reason I want to do that is to show you some of the tools that we can use before we even start this migration. So the underlying premise of REST-NSX is that this is your manager of managers for your environment. So for example, really quick, if I look at my data sources, these are all my V managers, all my T managers, my Verni, my Panorama, my VMC on AWS instance, all managed under a single pane of glass that I can easily toggle between them. And really the idea is not to show you all the bells and whistles of REST-NSX, because this is a 2-hour demo by itself. But the takeaway is that I can do anything I can do in NSX within REST-NSX, but more. Things like granular RBAC, centralized reporting, custom features that are not available in NSX that we bring because we're an overlay product to NSX. But two I'm going to focus on real quick here is under our tools section. One is called Object Analyzer. Object Analyzer is a tool that will look at your V environment or your T environment and tell you what's stale, what's not used in that environment, what can be cleaned up before you even think about going to T. So I just ran a collection using cache data. We could do it real time. Depending upon the size of the environment, it could take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but really it's quick and easy to do. And at the end of it, you get a report that shows me my inactive objects, my active objects, but also my duplicate objects and ones that are inactive or active. And these are duplicate objects, not just by pure definition. Let's say I have an IP set that's the same IPs in them. Yeah, sure, that's a duplicate. But let's say I have two security groups. One has dynamic criteria, one has static criteria. We calculate the effective members of these groups and tell you if there are overlaps, and we'll give you a confidence variable. The other thing we do is we look for inactive objects. So in this environment, orange represents inactive. Obviously a lab environment, lots of inactivity. But we'll look at things, for example, saying, here are all your firewall rules that have no hits on them, or maybe they're disabled, and whatever it is. We also look at parent-child relationships. So for example, if I look at IP sets, I could look at this environment and say, okay, what are my inactive objects? Then these are IP sets that aren't referenced in a firewall rule or security group at any level, but let's say they are referenced in a firewall rule, but that firewall rule has no hits or it's disabled. We're going to not only mark that firewall rule as inactive, but we're also going to mark its children elements. In this example, IP sets is inactive as well. And if we have the RBAC access, we can clean them up right here. Very quick and easy. Great tool just to run it as assessment of the V environment to see what can be cleaned up. The second one is similar to that, except we call this rule analyzer, and it's going to much more detail from a firewall rule perspective. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to show you all your sections, the anatomy of them, source destination criteria, but we're also going to allow you to launch a similar analysis on that of what is in these firewall rules. Are there duplicates? Are there no hits? And give me a report of that. But we're also going to show you some policy information and say, look at all my rule hits and duplicates on here, but also show me all my rules that have no logging enabled and highlight those rules. Show me all rules that don't have any comments, right? Maybe it's an InfoSec policy. Look at all my rule status, inactive, or no rules that have been hit in the last, or never, or the last 180 days. So I can very quickly and easily see this information and also see if I have any tracking over time set up for these rules. So very, very powerful tools. And before we switch over to the V to T side, I want to show you one report, which we call a runbook. A runbook is just as it sounds. This is how my environment is configured. So before my migration, I could come into REST-NSX and run a collection for this 644 manager, and it's going to give me a detailed inventory that I can export as Word or Excel. But this is getting down into the details of showing me exactly how my environment is configured, even down to the ESG level, where I can see all my VNIC configurations, my firewall rules, lots of them in this environment. We can see my load balancers, pools, VIPs, whatever it is. So this is a true documentation of your environment that I can do via a single click, gather all this data and have it. Then once I do my migration, I can come back into the tool, so switch over to NSX-T, rerun it, and we'll get that same report. So no long-winded documentation process. I can do this all in an automated fashion. So with that, lots more to REST-NSX, but just keep it in the back of your mind that anything you can do in NSX and more, you can do within REST-NSX. So at this point, I'm going to jump over to VDI desktop here. And so now you should be staring at my NSX-V manager, this is a 648 instance, small environment, microseg only, and we're going to migrate this to NSX-T for the sake of time. But we fully support all topologies, all different setups. So we have three tabs here. One is our vCenter tag. Then we have our MAT tool, Migration Assistance tool, sitting in the middle. And then on the far side, we have our NSX-T manager, which is a 3.0 instance. So we'll start on the V side to just show you a few things, how they're configured. Like I said, this is a small environment for the sake of time with microseg only. So let's look at firewall rules. And really, this one firewall rule tells the story of our process. So as I said earlier, we take an intent-based approach, which is we know what you have in your V environment. We know what T supports. So instead of you having to go and change all your objects or your rules or your ESGs in your V environment, which could obviously impact data flow, we take that intent-based approach and say, okay, in this example, we have a firewall rule that has two security groups in it that is supported by T. But, oh, by the way, here's an object called cluster. Right? This is my NSX-V cluster. And NSX-T has no concept of those vCenter objects. Could be cluster, data center, VNIC, whatever it is. No concept. You can't use those in a firewall rule. So migration coordinator, this is a very simple example, will flag this rule and say, you need to go fix this firewall rule, convert this cluster over to an IP set or tag membership, whatever it is. We take a totally different approach and we do it for you. So in this environment, if we look at cluster one, actually we'll go back to our hosting clusters here. So you can see cluster one has these VMs in it, right? Small subset, but some Photon VMs and a VM here. So when we go do this migration, we're going to see these guys converted into an NS group on the T side. So in the middle, we have our MAT tool, which I'll come back to. On the far side, we have our NSX-T instance. And from our perspective, the only thing you need up and running is the T manager and an edge node and edge cluster deployed. And that's all we need. You see some other objects here from other migrations, but everything we're going to move over is not here yet. So if we look at it from a fabric perspective, we look at our nodes. Sorry, a little slow here. So we have our edge transport nodes. We have two, but we only require one. And this is for instantiating any SR component of our tier 0 or tier 1 load balancing services, NAT, etc. Edge clusters, we have one edge cluster required, but we have two in this environment. But the idea is that once you set up your edge cluster, an edge node, a single edge node, and obviously have your NSX manager up and running, you can go back into our tool called MAT and start a migration. So we'll log in here, just like REST NSX, it's an OVA. You install and you start adding your data sources. On the left side, we can support up to 12 vManagers to a single T destination. In this environment, we have a .36, which is a scale test environment, thousands and thousands of rules, takes about 15 to 20 minutes. We have the environment that we were just logged into, .49 and 51, that we're going to migrate, which is a very small microseg. Then we have our 232 environment, which is what we call our all knobs environment. Every option is turned on in NSX. It could be ESG, multi-tiers, load balancing, NAT, whatever it is, we do that testing as well. So in this example, we're going to start this migration. So the first thing you would do is add your data sources. Add your vManager, add in the associated vCenter, add in your T manager. And at that point, the T manager, you can run this in migration mode or assessment mode. And the assessment mode is going to produce a report that you'll see here in a minute, because it's also included in the migration option, where you will just get the assessment of, okay, here's what we detected in the V environment that 27 Virtual can use to assess how long this migration is going to take and any potential impacts before they have to go scour your environment, click through all the interfaces, or even run the migration coordinator on here. So for the sake of the demo, we're going to do the migration, add a license, and here's really where the power of our tool comes in. So for example, these migration options, we give you the power to determine what a migration is going to look like. So for example, if I'm doing multiple NSX-V managers to a single T manager, and I have two objects named the same thing, that's not allowed in NSX-T. So I'm going to have an object collision. So in this environment, on a per data source perspective, I can say append characters NSX1 or whatever you want to every object so I know where it came from, or add a tag and scope to it. In this example, we'll do NSX1. But for all those objects that aren't supported in T, so for example, the cluster that we're talking about in a firewall rule, how do you want that object migrated? Do you want us to create an NS group that has the members of that cluster added as VMs or IP addresses? And this holds true for every unsupported object. So we don't want to halt the migration because you have an unsupported object. We just want to give you the power to dictate what it looks like. So the next step is done. We review that we're coming from this NSX manager, .49 at 6.4, and we're going to 3.0. From a vManager perspective, we support 6.3. You don't need to be at the latest 6.4.8, whatever it is. The reason we can do that is because we have the lift and shift strategy where we don't depend upon the VDS or NVDS, whatever it is on there. We support, vCenter 6.5, 6.7, 7.0. Again, does not matter to us. So the next step of this process is what we call the data collection phase. So this is where we're reaching out via API to your vManager and collecting everything in the environment. You're going to see oranges, greens, and reds on this collection screen, and that's intentional because this is what's telling you if you don't use our tool, or you're going to have to make these corrections manually before you use the migration coordinator or script it or whatever you want to do, because T just does not natively support things. So for example, OSPF, if we detected it, we say T doesn't support OSPF yet. So we will convert it to BGP for you, but we just want you to know T doesn't support it. So this is that true assessment mode of what's not or what is supported. So let's go look at that firewall rule we were looking at earlier. Obviously no network virtualization here. Let's go look at that DFW rule. And it was under objects, and we see that we marked it as info because it has a cluster in it. So we haven't told you what we're going to do with it yet, but we're alerting you to let you know that there's going to be a problem if you use anything other than this process we're about to show you. You can export this data in JSON and do a migration in your lab. You don't have to do it against your production NSX-T manager or use your NSX-V manager. You can also download that assessment report. And this is going to be that summary of what we just collected. It can be branded to however you want, but it's a summary of saying, okay, from a compute network perspective, microseg, here's all the things you need to be aware of, and here's the full inventory. So for example, how many rules, are global or universal or have, DFW applied to or unsupported applied to, whatever it is, regular expressions that T doesn't support. We're letting you know everything that is not supported in that environment. And once I review this data, I can go change my V environment. I can do a recollection, Or if I'm ready to look at the recommendations, I click this screen, which is called Review Transformations. On this page, all those reds are going to be turned to oranges or greens, meaning that green is T fully supports it, or orange, T will support it if after we massage it a little bit. So for example, if we go look at that DFW rule, it's marked as obviously orange here, and we'll see, okay, it has a cluster in here. So we're gonna actually create an NS group with the effective VMs in it because we selected that option during the migration. If I'm happy with whatever I see here, I can export as PDF with the same information. I can cancel it, do the recollection, proceed, or click the button, begin migration. So just to confirm on the T side, so you don't think there's any smoke and mirrors going on here, we do have some DFW sections with some other firewall rules, but nothing that we have here. So this highlights the fact that we can do multiple V managers to a single T manager. So we're ready to go. Click the begin migration, and we're off to the races. So our goal is to handle 90 to 95% of all the legwork of building the T environment, meaning firewall rules. If you have 3,000 firewall rules, you don't want to be doing that. Or if you have 3,000 firewall rules that have unsupported criteria in them, you're going to have to go change all of them without us. If you have 3,000 firewall rules and you want to do a lift and shift and build it yourself, you're building 3,000 firewall rules. We take that intent-based approach and get it done for you. So you see one warning here is probably an unsupported object. We give you a report at the end of what was not done. But we're going category by category here. I'll close this window so we can look here. So we built all our security groups. Here's all the T objects, and you notice that we appended NSX-1 to it because that's what we told it to do. And we are done. So again, not that many firewall rules, not that many objects, but let's go take a look at the T environment, refresh it, and we see all our sections here. Object NSX-1 we'll look at. And this section, right, has the NS groups we created, but also notice it has cluster 1. And if we look at cluster 1, we have all the VMs in it that were in that cluster in the V environment. So we automatically added them for you. So it's effectively the exact same thing as having cluster 1 in my firewall rule. That's our goal at the end of the day, to have an effective T configuration to V. So now you can start moving hosts over, testing things, whatever you want to do. But in situations where I couldn't associate a VM to a security group or attach a tag to a VM because it's not in inventory, we can go and do what we call a post-migration task. And this post-migration task is things where the inventory was not available. So for example, let's say Photon 1 is still living in my V environment. T doesn't see that inventory yet. So therefore, I can't assign a tag. I can't add it to an NS group, whatever it is. But if I click on NS groups as a post-migration task, you'll notice that new virtual machine, Photon VM here was available in inventory. So we added it automatically to that NS group that existed over there. If we look at it from a tag perspective, there are no, actually in the V environment, there were no tags assigned, but this is where you do the tag reassignment on that front. So let's assume we did a test, we moved a host over, and we started testing things out and didn't quite work out how we wanted. I can come back into the tool at any point, roll it back to the previous state. Very important concept here is that we're not rolling it back to the default NSX-T manager configuration. We're rolling it back prior to this migration. So for example, if we had 12 V to T migrations to the same destination, we would just selectively roll back which one we wanted on that front. So I'm gonna let it roll back, but for all intents and purposes, this is the end of the demo, and we can open it up for some questions.
Yep. So what we can do is, first of all, I just want to say thanks everybody for being here and participating. What we're going to do is open it up to a question and answer session now. So Brent, if you want to go ahead and start unmuting the attendees' microphones, I know that we probably have a good number of questions, and we can open it up to more of an open forum type of setup here and just have a discussion with you guys. I have some extra time to hang out after the 2 o'clock timing is here. So if you guys want to stay and chat, I will be here. But before you leave, if you do have to cut out right at 2 o'clock, I know we've got plenty of meetings probably right after this, but please, when the meeting closes out, You're going to be presented with that survey popping up in your browser automatically. Please fill out that survey. Give yourself a chance to win that $100 gift card. If you have any questions on this or would like to set up some time with 27 Virtual and REST NSX, please reach out to us. You can go to our website, 27virtual.com. You can reach out to brent.kaplan@27virtual.com as well. And we'd be happy to have a more detailed conversation with you guys on this. That being said, I'm going to unmute some mics.
Yeah, it looks like we do have one question which I can answer, which is Sandeep asked, they're running active, and they want to migrate to T. Does REST NSX support that at the time of migration? The answer is yes. We support global objects, universal objects, cross vCenter, whatever it is. It does not have to be an active standby. I always like in Zoom when you turn on the speaker, it says talking permitted. It's like, you know, parent guarding the child.
All right, so yes, I have unmuted, or well, I have granted the permission to talk to everybody that it's allowing me to. Marlene and Marta, it's saying that you're on older versions of Zoom, so it's not giving me the ability to allow you to speak, but you can always type your question into the Q&A. Other than that, if you have a question, just unmute your mic in Zoom and fire away. We're here for you. Any questions for us?
There are some reminders for William.
Just unmute your mic in Zoom and you should be able to talk.
One thing, maybe this will prompt some conversation. One thing I did not discuss, because obviously we did a kind of speed dating demo, is that when it comes to the V to T migration, the MAT tool, we also support migrating to different vCenters. So your destination vCenter does not need to be the same as your source vCenter. And the way we're able to achieve that is because when we collect all the inventory, we collect things by not only the object ID, but also the name. What that means is if I want to reassociate a tag with a VM or a VM with the NS group or whatever it is, and I'm moving to a different vCenter, I cannot do that traditionally because when I go to that new vCenter, I'm going to have a new UUID or the object ID. And because we track it by name and ID, if we find a matching VM at the destination with the same name, we will reassociate the tag or add it to the NS group, just like it had a matching UUID at the beginning. So pretty cool feature, especially for those customers moving, you know, not wanting to upgrade the source vCenter and just migrate to a net new.
Awesome. And Bill, before you go, what's the one biggest thing you would say to take away when it comes to V to T migrations from what you've learned doing some of these so far?
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say before I drop off is that, you know, it's important to note that everybody's environment's different. One of the big things that I've run into is, you know, the whole thing about having a seed host. So customers may not necessarily have a budget for seed host, or they may be in a situation where they have a vSAN cluster they can't tear apart. And those situations can be a little bit more difficult. So if you're planning to migrate, think about if you're in the middle of possibly a refresh of hardware, is there an opportunity to refactor that to migrate over? If you have a tight budget and you can't afford to purchase seed host, one thing you can do is take your environment and squeeze it down. So if you have enough resources, let's say your cluster is 50% utilized, you can squeeze that cluster down, pull a host out, build a new cluster, right? And then you can take hosts and migrate them into that new cluster. Remember that the NSX-V bits and the NSX-T bits cannot be on the host at the same time, right? So if you're not able to purchase new seed hosts, or you can't swing hosts out of your existing cluster, then you're left with kind of doing that in place upgrade, right? The other option we didn't talk about also is rip and replace, where you basically kind of, you know, move your VMs over to VLANs, remove V completely, install T, and then reconnect everything back up, which is a lot of work, right? So I would say whenever you can, with all that being said, I would say the lift and shift to the same vCenter would be the smoothest migration option, right? But if you're going to move to a new vCenter in a new environment, there's some benefits there as well. So just understand also that you could be in an environment where maybe one cluster, you're going to do a rip and replace maybe. Maybe another cluster, you do an in-place migration with Migration Coordinator, but then you might have this really big complex cluster where a tool like REST NSX MAT tool, really makes a lot of sense. So
Cool.
that's all I got. I got to go.
right,
I'll
thank you.
thank you very much for joining, and I'll see you guys next time.
Cool. So I want to answer Sandeep's other question here while we have a few minutes, which is essentially REST NSX over Cytopus or SPJ's product. So again, we like to focus on our strengths. So I don't like to bash any person's other product or service, but I will highlight some differentiators in that sense of that. We've been doing we're in the software business. We've been doing this for about 2 years as it relates to V to T migrations. 27 Virtual has been doing this a long time from a services perspective. So I think the marrying of our two products and services together is best of breed. No hands down. SPJ Cytopus, on the other hand, again, this is not bashing, it's just calling out facts that they are primarily a services organization that happened to create a product that they use internally as partners, customers. Our understanding is you cannot get to the tool. It's just something that they use internally for doing migrations. Lots of other differentiators, and where I'll kind of leave it is that if you look at the history of feature releases and capabilities, it's right out of our playbook. So
Okay, so I have a question here. So in case when I do the migration, so how my DFW rules, because I have around more than 10,000 rules in a DFW.
Okay.
So how will you migrate that rules if suppose I'm going for the REST and access NSX, and so what is the reliability on that rules that it will not override there, and it will be give me a proper in rules which is configured in the DFW in the NSX-V to NSX-T?
great question. So every API call that we do, we validate the results. So for example, when we create a
So
firewall,
do you test that in your lab environment first, then only you are going to touch my production environment?
no, see, that's the beauty of the lift and shift strategy of the MAT tool, is that you can do it in your lab, you can do it in 27 Virtual's lab, or you could do it against your NSX-T manager that's in production but not in use yet. Because remember,
Okay.
when we do the collection against NSX-V, as soon as we have that collection, that first step, you could disconnect your NSX-V manager from MAT.
Certainly. That's right. That's right.
And
Yep.
do the migration with no impact to your production environment. Do as many migrations as you want with absolutely no impact.
Okay.
But from a scale perspective, we've tested tens of thousands of rules. Obviously, the time is going to vary based upon the criteria you have in your firewall rules. If you have, let's say, IP sets or security groups with just standard dynamic criteria like VM tag equals whatever, that's going to be a very, very quick migration because we don't have to create a lot of objects. But if you have a lot of unsupported objects, let's say you're using clusters, data centers, VNICs, and either apply to or source destination, then it's going to take a little bit more time because we take that intent-based approach, create that NS group, and attach it. So you're talking, a range of 20 to 60 minutes for DFW of rule sets of 10,000 or more.
Okay. So I just want to know, in case of migration, if how much time will you guys take? Like if it's if I have a high large environment or a small environment or medium environment, how much time it will take to do the migrations from V to T?
Yeah, lots of variables in that question. I wish I could give you a straight answer. Are you doing microseg only, but also network virtualization, or what's kind of the breakdown? And I can give you a ballpark.
So do you want to discuss here, or you want me to discuss offline with you, or how it? Suppose if I try to.
Absolutely, you can talk offline. So best way to reach us is either through 27 Virtual or email info@restnsx.com.
Info@restnsx.com, is it correct?
Yep, that is correct. And then we can set up a conversation.
Certainly, yeah. Okay. And I have last question. If somebody have a question, they can ask. I will ask later on. I'm just thinking about that. Yeah.
I think. Does anybody else have a question? If not, feel free to go ahead.
So just want to know the when I have suppose I have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 NSX managers. So when I'm going to go to NSX-T Federation,
Mhm.
so how it will be beneficial here in the 6 managers? Do I need to only one manager is required as a federation global manager? Some remaining all I can manage like NSX-V managers, NSX-T managers, like that.
Yep. So the best approach, in our opinion, and there's different strategies here, is that you migrate each V manager to a local manager, and then you introduce your global manager to manage them all. And we can do that natively within our platform. So Andrew, I'm not sure if you have a different take, but that's one I've
Or
seen.
in case, one last question. In case I'm my NSX is integrated with the VCD. I think you are aware of that VCD, right? VMware vCloud Director.
Correct.
So in that case, what things needs to be changed? Any hint you can give me?
Well, I'm glad you didn't say VRA, because that's a whole different discussion. VCD, fortunately, doesn't require you to use VCD to manage objects. Like you could go into NSX and manage objects and there's no conflict. VRA,
No, because see, my customers we are not given any access to infrastructure to our customers, so they can only do anything whatever they want to do from the VCD.
right. So from our experiences, the mileage is going to vary on that one, but we don't see any.
I'm sorry, I'm asking some out of the box questions, but it's give me a little bit understanding when I'm planning for migration. So it give me a little bit understanding. So that's the reason I'm asking all these things. Please forgive me or excuse me if I'm asking any
No,
bullshit question or any out of the box question.
no.
Please forgive me.
That's why we're all here. So from a VCD perspective, obviously, if it's microseg only, I don't foresee any issues, right? When you start talking about load balancing and ECMP and all that kind of stuff, that's going to vary. I can't give you a straight up answer on that, but microseg should be pretty straightforward.
Okay, so as I understand from the V to T migration use cases, is like one is the architecture change. If you have an architecture change, then microsegmentation is one most important part. Then our network virtualization, and if we have a multiple DCs and federation. So these are the some basic components, or I can say some other use cases which is required to think at the time of migration. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. So we've seen different strategies, which is customers using our tools to migrate from V to T, just microseg, and then manually recreate the network virtualization because they wanted a totally different architecture on the T side. So we've seen that, and we've seen people do the whole thing. So really, one thing I did not highlight was that we also support selective migrations. So for example, I could say, I want to migrate just these firewall rules or just microseg and not network virtualization. You just uncheck the box in the migration part of it. So it's selective.
Okay, so I have last 2 questions. So my second last question is, I would like to know, like, is it REST NSX is approved by the VMware? Am I correct? This whenever
I can't say the
like
word.
because
I'm sorry.
Because I think about the REST NSX, I have seen in the VMware 2020 one of the session. I believe somebody has spoken about it. Is it you or somebody else? I'm not remember, but somebody has spoken about this. So is this feature came into the VMware 20?
That is correct. So we are a VMware partner, but I cannot say that we are an approved solution of VMware. Right? They don't endorse third-party products.
Okay.
Us or not, but we are a partner of theirs from a development perspective. We work very closely with them within the BU. We have weekly sync calls or bi-weekly sync calls with the BU, talk about features, roadmap. So it's as close as you're going to get.
Understood. Understood. And last, my question is the demo which you showed, right? So
Mhm.
do you have any demos in which I can watch again in the YouTube or somewhere, or in the somewhere in your website, to understand once again the thing, to think about that?
Yes, in fact, I believe tomorrow the NSX-BU is going to be putting out a video on TechZone, VMware's TechZone page, of a 20-minute long V to T demo, which was much more in depth than what was shown today.
Okay, thanks very much. It's really helpful, and it will give me a better picture. So when I'm planning to do these migration,
Yep.
thank you very much.
No, thank you for the questions.
All right, fantastic. Well, DJ, thanks so much for being here, answering all those questions. Everybody that's still on, thank you so much for attending today. It means a lot. Again, fill out that survey, email brent.kaplan@27virtual if you want to have one of those more in-depth discussions about your environment. We'd be happy to take a look, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.